Hello, and welcome to this debut episode of By the Hearth. I'm your hostess, Dawna Kreis, also known as the Mental Mystic. Each week I plan to welcome a new guest from my ever-expanding tribe to discuss a variety of spiritually and mystically related topics. Basically, this podcast is a reboot of The Pause, which I did last year. In the time since my last episode, I've gotten more clear about what I want to do. And as I went along, I realized I really missed the podcast. So I'm rebooting it and doing video, and it is less rehearsed, it's more authentic, and it feels more like me. So I hope you will join me in the days to come. And for a starter, I am just going to go ahead and play the last episode of The Pause, which was a recap of all the interviews that I did throughout the season. And so we will start from there. It was only an audio, it was not a video. So you will not see anything, but in the season to come, you will see me, my guests, warts and all. So I hope you will join me, and I hope you're looking forward to it as much as I am. I'll see you soon. Thanks. Bye.
One of the things that I enjoyed most about season 1 were the stories. I know that doesn't come as any surprise to you. I'm always mentioning it. But we had some amazing stories. Take, for instance, Kate Walter's awakening story.
So a lot of our listeners are on their own spiritual paths right now at different points, and I'm just curious if you can remember back to when you first started awakening and to your spiritual gifts.
It's been a long process. When I was a teenager, I was brought up in an Italian Catholic family, so there's a lot of rules to that, and I was kind of a non-rule person, so I was always kind of searching for something. And one day, in the middle of the day, I was in the house with my mother, and my grandmother was there, and the phone rang. And this was back when there was, phones on the wall and a cord, and,
It was still attached to the wall.
It was still attached to the wall. And it was my aunt who had passed away like 7 years prior to that. And she was saying, "We're here, and we love you, and your grandfather's here, and everybody's here, and we love you." And then it went dead. And it was like whooshing. And I hung the phone. It was in the middle of the day. I hung the phone up and I looked at my family. I was like, "You are not going to believe who that was on the phone." And they were like, thought I was kind of a little crazy. But after that, it just, like, I could have written it off as being maybe I was dreaming and I didn't realize, or I just hallucinated it, or what didn't really happen. But I know in my heart of hearts that it did.
And something just as amazing happened to Kathy Hahn with regard to her mother. She goes on to share it in her episode 1.
What would you say inspired you to do what you do?
So I've had the gift all my life. My mom has always done different things to encourage the gift. The earliest memory I have is when I was 19, she invited a medium over to the house, and we went into individual readings, and the medium was asking me if I was experiencing things that she experienced, and I lied. I said no.
No.
Not me.
Because that would be weird.
I'm not that dumb. That's schizophrenia. You know? But seriously, things like that logically would go through your head. You'd take a psychology course and you'd learn these things. But I would say truly my mom was my inspiration, and in her transition period in 2012, she went to bed one night saying she was going to fight the good fight to stay on Earth with us after meeting with 2 doctors in her bedroom who were telling her, you know, there is hope even after being sent home with hospice. They said, this is just a block, we can remove it. And she said, I'm going to do it. And then I had a dream where she visited me and she said, I'm not going to fight. And she explained why, and she explained, you know, what was going on, and she said, and you will always be able to reach me just like this, and you know it. And the next morning I couldn't move out of bed. I was facing the wall on my side, and I was at her house, and my sister came in, and I could hear the tears in her voice. She said, Mom is asking for you, and I said, I know what she wants. And she said, what does she want? And I said, she's going to tell me she doesn't want to fight. She said, how do you know that? And I said, she already visited me, she already told me. And my sister said, get up and go in there. And so I did, and I was leaning on the door frame of the door. I didn't go into the room, and Mom was sitting up. And she just smiled at me, and she nodded, and she said, yup, that happened. And she said, we will always be able to communicate just like you've always been able to communicate with everyone. She said, it's a gift, and it's time to use it.
On this journey, I've realized that there are some of us that are very lucky to embark on it, to start on it from an early age. That some of us are aware from an early age as to what is going on in the direction that we need to move in. For me, it's been a long road. But for Astra, she grew up in a magical household. And she said that she's always known about the magic. But she shared with us one incident that occurred with what you could call a soul friend or a soul mate. It occurred at the age of 5.
Okay, so really quick. Yeah, right. I first met one of my very best friends in the whole world, and we're still BFFs. When we were 5 years old in kindergarten, we accidentally, yes, we bumped foreheads by accident, and we both had the big egg lumps on the forehead, and it was pretty painful. So we went to the office, the school office, and they gave us ice packs, and we're sitting on this bench in the office with these ice packs on our heads, crying, and then we looked over at each other, and then we both started laughing. It was just so ridiculous. And then we started talking, and we were very advanced 5-year-olds, and she's like, I'm a Gemini. My birthday's June 3rd. What about you? I'm like, oh my God, I'm a Gemini. My birthday's June 8th. And she's like, my mom's an Aries. And I'm like, well, my mom's an Aries, So we were twins from the start, and we would ever after that, ever since then, we always have had a psychic connection. And so I knew about the magic already, and I feel like I even knew about it before then when I was like talking to bugs outside and things like that. I kind of came into it, and I was born into the home of flower children, so it's always kind of been pretty magical. Both my parents are very psychic, even though they don't necessarily practice it every day on purpose. But so it's always been sort of lingering in the background.
As I mentioned earlier, doing the pause, getting it off the ground has been a real education for me. Not only in the technical aspects, but the stories. Talking with other people, getting to really know them, getting to learn about their background and how they came onto the path of what some call awakening or enlightenment. By talking with people, I've realized that awakening isn't just one occurrence. And a lot of times it's something that doesn't just occur when we're adults. It's something that when we look back, we can see that we were rather different from the other kids. And that is something that Karen Dugan mentioned when I talked to her in episode 3.
What was the trigger? I know, right? So I've always been, my family, you can ask my family, I've always been sensitive.
Mm-hmm.
You're too sensitive. I'm like, yes, I am.
Thanks for noticing.
Exactly. And I've also been empathic, but I didn't really know what that meant, other than sometimes someone would say, "Oh, that girl's really nice. You should be friends." And I'd be like, "No, she doesn't like me." "Oh, no, they're," and then I'd find out, yes, she really didn't like me. But the thing that kind of took it to a head where I actually had to focus on it was when I was actually going through therapy, deciding if I was going to divorce from my husband at the time. Then I learned a lot about adult children of alcoholics. I learned a lot. Started learning down that metaphysics path in a big way. I think I'd kind of started down that path, but I really just started sucking in the knowledge, taking classes, reading books, going to webinar, or going to
being a
seminars. Yeah, really sponging all of it and seeing what stuck, right? And learning about how to protect myself because of being, an empath, and then learning about what all that meant, and that it actually was a gift, not a curse, to be sensitive, And then when I learned about Reiki, that was like, oh, this is awesome. I know. I still remember the first time I had a session. I came downstairs in this metaphysics shop up in Virginia, and I went by the pendulums. They all start going, shoo, 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 shoo.
Oh, wow.
And then she's like, oh, we need to ground you.
Yeah, thanks.
In the last episode, episode 7, my guest was Sandan. And not only did she share with us how it felt for her to feel different growing up, but she gave us a different perspective, that of the generation that moved into adulthood in the 60s and 70s.
Began really, I was brought up in a kind of nice family in England, and my father became quite a wealthy entrepreneur. He had his own business. And so, I had a nice middle-class upbringing. My parents sent me to what we call a public school, but is in fact a private school, a boarding school. And already I was like, I hated it. It just, I was kind of a nice, meek girl, a little tomboy with an older brother who was very intelligent. And he was also away at school. But there was something, I don't know, there was a movie years ago. It was kind of a bit like, it had Malcolm McDowell in, and was a bit along the lines of A Clockwork Orange, and it was called If. And it was about a bunch of schoolboys that had like a kind of rebellion at school. And that really fired me up as I got into my kind of 15, 16 years old. I was just like, I don't fit here. But it really, that was kind of the unfolding. Then my brother he became a bit of a pot smoker. So I had my first joint at 16. And that was like, there's something else going on here. And, you got to remember it was about the time of Woodstock, because I'm old, people can't see me. But I'm a very young, youthful 65, but it was Woodstock, the Isle of Wight. It was the time of all the festivals, people experimenting with LSD. Then I went to university, and I really didn't fit there either. I didn't want to go to university. My father was quite domineering, and he was like, anyone with a brain goes to university. And I really wanted to go to more of a technical kind of college and learn some applicable skills, because you come out of university and you've got a degree and you're like, okay, what do I do with it? And maybe things have changed today. But, I did not fit in at university, so I fell in with a bad lot, and we spent a lot of time smoking dope and taking drugs. And I did come out with a degree. And then I went to live in France for a little while. I had like a gap year. So all of this is kind of unfolding. Excuse me. And I'm becoming more rebellious, if you like. And certainly, there's many people listening might have a very dim view of the 60s and 70s and people taking drugs, but it wasn't a wanton thing. It was really done, I guess, quite consciously. Certainly with the LSD, it was a way of, it wasn't like kind of every other day you'd be dropping acid. It would be a ritual, if you like. But I really discovered that there was something else outside of the get married, 2.2 children, settle down, work for 40 years, and that's your lot. Mm-hmm. Then I met a guy who became my future husband, and he was the only person really I'd met who was along the same kind of wavelength as me. And we got married, and we went to live down in Devon, which was about as far from my family and his family as we could get. And we met a guy, we sort of lived there, but we were so unhappy. It was just like we had everything that should have made us happy, and yet we were still like kind of this divine discontent. And, that didn't help our relationship, and we were fighting a lot. Always this kind of angst, if you like. And then we met a guy who lived down the road, and people, it's a very straight kind of farming community. And people said, oh, he's a bit strange. He sits in his garden in pink pajamas. And I was like, oh, this guy's kind of, he sounds more like, somebody that we might like to meet. And so we met him. And sorry if this is a long story, but
no, not at all.
Almost at the crunch. We met him, and he had a big house, and he said, oh, this is a center, and we're having this guy Viresh is going to come for the weekend, and we're going to do a group. I mean, this is like, I've never heard of any of this kind of stuff, really. I think I'd seen something about Osho on a TV at some point, like a TV reportage or something, and went, oh, this is crap. The people the people who were standing outside this gateless gate, and they're like, oh yeah, man, he's so far out. And I was like, oh God, these people are so stupid. But Viresh arrived for the weekend, and he invited us to come and do his workshop, like for free. Everybody else had paid, I don't know, £500 or something, which was 1980. Mm-hmm. And he said, well, you're both invited. First off, my husband said, well, I'm going to do this. And I said, well, over my dead body, I don't want you to do that, and tried to manipulate and control the situation. He said, well, I'm doing it anyway. And I was helping in the kitchen, and I could hear all these kind of strange sounds coming out of this big group room. And, actually what they were doing was like rebirthing and kind of breathing exercises, but I can leave it to your imagination what I thought was happening. I closed the door. I was freaking out. And so Viresh said, well, yeah, you can come, you join in. And at the end of the 3 days or something, it was very intense, and he put us through some very confronting kind of processes. But he had also said, if it isn't for you and anything's too confronting, just sit the process out. But, just come and dip your toe in. And we both jumped in hell for leather. And at the end of it, and here's my point, it was like a 5-day acid trip without the acid. Everybody was so expanded and kind of so in the heart and so connected with each other. And all through this thing, we'd been listening to the voice of Osho, like Viresh would have picked certain little quotes that would, accentuate what we'd been going through, all very kind of targeted, if you like, very appropriate. Mm-hmm. And at the end, I was just like, wow, okay, this is what I've been looking for. And the joke of all of that is, okay, then it was a process. But I sort of thought that was the end of the journey, when in actual fact it was the beginning. But that was when consciousness kind of woke up and went, okay, I'm in this. This is what I've been looking for. This is someone who's speaking my language, and he's speaking truth. And you and your listeners probably know, when you hear truth, you get like hair on the back of your neck. Uh-huh. You go, oh yeah. That's undeniable truth. And it might be different for each one of us, but then there's some intrinsic truths that you hear, and you're just like, okay, that's it.
On our journey of awakening, Some of us sometimes experience extremely challenging situations, and it causes us to step outside of ourselves, and not only do we grow, but it instills in us a desire to be of assistance to others in one way or another. Such was the case with my friend Tina Hayden, and it was what she experienced that was a catalyst for an enormous amount of growth and inspired her to start Hayden Heals.
It was a little bit of a combination of things. Last year, at the end of May, I found out that I had urothelial cancer that had already metastasized. So I was dealing with that.
And what exactly? Where is that located? Just
the ureter is the little tube that goes from your kidney down to your bladder.
Okay.
And so the mass had grown up in there right at the junction of the kidney and the ureter, and had grown up into my bladder and was blocking the bladder. And I think so I ended up, after going through chemo, and we did surgery to remove the the kidney and the ureter, a little tiny piece of did have to remove a little tiny piece of the bladder. They call it bladder cuff, where the ureter, attaches to.
Oh, okay.
And about 20 lymph nodes. They took out 20 lymph nodes as well.
Oh, wow. And so you had the cancer, and what was, without, getting too into detail as to what was your own experience? That had to have been difficult to go through. It
was difficult, but it was, I don't know, I was just determined. The hardest part for me was in the very beginning of going through all the tests and the different doctors and determining the course of action. I felt like I needed to know what the plan was, so that I could get in the proper fight mode, if that made sense. But I never once did I really sit and think, why me? I was always, there's a purpose for this. It's a rare cancer to begin with, not a very common one. And for my age and the fact that I've never smoked, it's normally older people who've been, smoking for 30 plus years that is normally found in. So I didn't even fit the whole modality of this particular cancer. So I just figured there was a reason, there was a message there. There is something that was supposed to come out of it. And I didn't know right away what it was, but I knew as I was going through that, and I was seeing, people at the treatment center, because I would be there at one point for a while. I was there 4 days a week. I was going to for about 4 months. And so I saw what they went through. At the same time, my sister-in-law has MS, and she was having some issues with the progression of her MS. I realized at that time that I can get over my cancer, and but she's not going to get over her MS. So that's something that she's going to be dealing with. And also, a friend of the family, his father was diagnosed with Alzheimer's during that same time frame. So I was, kind of being part of seeing what they were going through with that diagnosis and his ultimate passing from that and everything. So I realized that there is a lot of organizations out there. I found a fantastic support group in Annapolis called the Wellness House, that was for people with cancer and their caregivers. And there's a lot of support groups for each particular type of diseases, but it doesn't matter what we're going through or what disease we have. There was a quote that I had heard, it said, it doesn't matter what color your ribbon is, we're all still going through the same thing. So that's how I came up with the idea of Hayden Heals, was because I feel like it doesn't matter what we're going through.
From a spiritual perspective, can you share a little more about your journey there?
Oh yeah, sure. As far as oh, absolutely, definitely. So when I went up, I trained up at Kripalu, which is the yoga and wellness center up in the Berkshires of Massachusetts, and it was. I knew I was still struggling with, even though physically I've healed well, I still had struggles with, and I do, and I think that it's a norm for anybody that has these type of, serious illness that or diseases that they're going through is a bit of a PTSD of the trauma of what I went through and the fear of the future of if it doesn't, what if it comes back? So I felt like even though physically I was back, I just could not get myself back spiritually or, on the soul level. So just being out there, it was a 10-day training class, and it was transformational. You made that connection and you just I just started paying attention to nature. And as I made that connection, you just realize, and it was in the spring, so things were just starting to come back to life. So it was very symbolic for me.
Oh, definitely.
And then there was just one day I was sitting out there in my meditation spot, and I'm taking everything in and all the new life, and it just thinking of the history, like, the stories that land could the land could tell. And I kind of just picked up on the energies of the things that might have taken place and envisioned that. And it just dawned on me that it's not, the trees lose their leaves every year, but every spring they come back. They don't hold back because they know they're going to lose it again in the fall. They bloom again. The underbrush still comes back up, even though the deer is going to come along and eat most of it. But
yeah,
nature doesn't live in fear of the future, and it doesn't live in the past trauma. So that was with that realization, that's when I truly feel like my soul truly healed.
and sometimes it's not challenges or trauma that brings us to a path of awakening or being of assistance to our fellow humans. Sometimes it's just synchronicity, which was the case with my friend and guest, Laura Young.
Okay. And how did you come to be interested in these?
Well, now I guess it's been about 15 years ago, I was introduced to the labyrinth as a spiritual practice in some classes that I was attending. And there were also a lot of other spiritual practices that we got exposed to. But I really kind of fell in love with the labyrinth because for me, meditation works better for me if I have a little bit of movement involved. And so it really did touch me. And then I got involved because from there I started studying it, and the group facilitated some of us going and taking some training to be able to facilitate things like group walks and educational experiences around the labyrinth.
Here in South Carolina, not only are we fortunate to have some of the most beautiful gardens I've ever seen, but we also have Laura here educating us in the use of the labyrinth. Now, at the time of the summer solstice, after this episode was released, I had the pleasure of experiencing the labyrinth at Brook Green Gardens myself firsthand. And I have to tell you, it was an absolutely wonderful experience. It was a beautiful day. It was clear. It wasn't too hot. And the labyrinth is situated on a creek there, and it was absolutely wonderful. So much so that since then I have volunteered to be of assistance to the planning and education committee that is behind the events at Brook Green Gardens Labyrinth. But my experience isn't the only one. And when I was talking with Laura, she did share a couple of experiences, including a personal experience she had at another labyrinth.
And we have seen some isolated cases where we could visually see it really touching people.
Can you share some of those stories?
Sure. Obviously without names, but
yes,
but
exactly.
the last walk that we had, which was on June 1st, we had a woman come out that had lost a child, and she was crying, and she came back out after the walk though and said that while clearly nothing was going to make that grief go away, that it had been very useful, and she felt a little lighter and just much more peaceful coming out. Also, one thing that I do like to share because it's very meaningful to me, I have to say we can't do this at Brook Green because we don't allow pets, but service animals only, not pets. So my experience, one of my most meaningful experiences was a few years ago when I had an elderly dog, a little dachshund, that I was going to have to say goodbye to, and she was in renal failure. And so the morning that we were going to take her to the vet, I took her to the local labyrinth that I walk most often, and I walked her. We did a labyrinth walk with her just on my shoulder. And to me, that was just, it's hard to explain why that means so much to you, but I guess it's sort of, like we mentioned the other day, it was sort of like creating your own ritual. And now, of course, every time I go to that labyrinth, I call it Sienna's Labyrinth. And it just is always going to mean something to me. So you never know, you never know when people come out, what they're dealing with in their lives, what they might be going through, and why the labyrinth may be useful to them. Most of us find that, our everyday walks are just, that's peaceful, it's nice to be in the gardens, which is wonderful in and of itself, helping you to clear your mind. But occasionally you hit those points in your life where you just really need something, and it really means something to you. And whether you can do that in a group setting where you feel other people sort of holding you, even if they don't know your situation, or if you go down there and walk totally alone, many people just find it very...
Well, that's it for this week's episode of By the Hearth podcast. For show notes as well as a peek at upcoming episodes, please visit us at thementalmystic.com. Join me next week when I once again delve into the archives and pull out an interview that I recently did with Alania Starhawk. I hope to see you then. Thanks. Bye.